Welcome back. So we're going to build a small project. Don't worry, we have something more substantial and interesting looking coming up towards the end of the section, but this is really to help cement the grid system as well as to introduce a new component in Bootstrap 4 called the card, and it combines three components back in the days of Bootstrap 3. Those three components are panels, thumbnails, and wells. So those are now all gone and replaced with the all-encompassing component, the card. So we're going to focus on that. But first, let me show you the very simple project. It's sort of like, I don't even know what it is. I'm calling it Pattern. It's a website for people to collect patterns that they like, images of patterns you could use for desktops or background images or something. It only has 3 patterns, and these are all cards here. Each card has an image on it. It has a border around it. The image is on top, but we could also easily move it to the bottom. It has a download button. It has this heart button, so you could collect or favorite some of your favorite patterns. It has some text, a little header, and it's responsive, of course. So as I shrink it down, those cards now take up all the space that's available to them. We have a little Jumbotron up here that has a background image. It's not the most beautiful thing ever. We have some buttons that don't actually mean anything. There's an icon up here as well as this heart icon that's coming from Font Awesome. I just wanted to show that Font Awesome has also changed a bit since Bootstrap 3. Well, since the days I was recording the videos on Bootstrap 3. So this will serve as an update to that content as well. So really just a new version of the image gallery we've already built, but also we'll be able to add things like margin here without having to write any CSS on our own. Now we will write one line of CSS to add this background image to the Jumbotron, but otherwise we don't need to do anything. It's all just classes using Bootstrap. So there are 2 folders inside of the folder for this video. There is the final, which has the final version, and then the starter. The starter just has a couple of images, so 4 different images that we'll come back to. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4 images, as well as index.html that just has Bootstrap included, and that's it. So we're going to work in index.html. And the first thing we can do is make our navbar. So it's a really simple navbar. There's nothing in the way of responsiveness. The only thing I guess I should point out is that the navbar brand is in line with the rest of the content. It's actually inside of a container inside of the navbar instead of being all the way on the left like the default version would be. But there's nothing responsive about it. So all we have to do is just make our navbar. So let's start there. We're going to do a nav with the class of navbar. And then we need to specify the background. So I'm going to do BG dark. Feel free to change that if you don't like the dark one. And then also the text color, which is navbar dark. Whoops. And I always think that's kind of confusing, but if you have a dark navbar, you need light text. I kind of wish they had just said BG dark and text light or something. Instead, you have to say navbar dark. All right, so that's going to just give us our bar. If I refresh, there we go. There's nothing in it. So the next thing we'll do is add our navbar brand. So an anchor tag with navbar-brand, and I'm just calling it pattern. We'll worry about the icon in a moment. Refresh the page. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. By default, I really don't know which one it is. It's over on the left versus here, it starts out inside this container, just like all of this content is in a container. It doesn't go all the way to the left, but then as we shrink it down, that container grows, or the edges sort of shrink down, and you can see that this is always in line with the rest of our content. So we just put a container inside the navbar. So right here, I'm going to make a div with a container, or with the class of container, and move my anchor tag inside of that. Save, refresh. Okay, so now we have to add the icon in. And before I do that, I just wanted to mention you could play around with, changing this color to whatever you want. If you prefer primary or info or a custom background color, you could just do style, background, and then do something like cyan, and then get rid of our BG info here. And now we have a cyan navbar. I'm not going to do that, but you can easily replace it with whatever you prefer. So let's go back to BG dark. Now, as far as the icon, I chose binoculars. I was having kind of a hard time finding anything that meant anything. The idea, I guess, is that you are searching and collecting patterns here that you could use for design purposes on this website. So that's what I went with. I'm using a library called Font Awesome. It's been around for a while, but it's changed a little bit. It's no longer exclusively free. There's now some icons that are pro, some that are free. So if you go to fontawesome.com, there's different versions. What I did, I'm going to make this larger. What I did is just searched for, I tried a couple different things, but I ended up using binoculars. But if you just go to all icons, actually, you'll see that on the left, you can look for free icons and only look at the free ones, or look at free and pro. The pro ones are grayed out. You have to pay to use them. So we're going to stick with free. And if you do look for binoculars, this is the one I'm using. And they tell you the classes you need. So it's icon, or I as the element, and then class equals FAS, FA-binoculars. So we can just copy that if we want. And if we add that in right now, nothing's going to happen. But we can do that. So where we want it is right inside of this navbar brand, right there. So we have our icon and then the word pattern. And now if we refresh the page, there's not going to be anything there because we don't have the Font Awesome library included. So if you go to how to use, they have a nice CDN, and you select the free or the pro version, but you'll have to sign in for the pro one. So we want the free one. Copy this link, and we'll just put it up top where we have our Bootstrap link as well. And save, refresh the page. We now have binoculars. Now the thing you might notice is a little cramped. And we could go and add space in here, but what we can also do is add some margin to either the text, but that's going to be harder because we'll have to wrap it in a span. But the icon is easy. We can just add some margin on the right. So margin right dash, we can play around with it. Let's do 3 and see how that looks. It looks pretty good. That's, I'm pretty sure, the same size. I guess I used capital letters here, and in the initial version I didn't, so we can fix that. But otherwise, we now have that space. Cool. Might be too much. Maybe I did margin 2. Okay, so we have the navbar done. Next we have this heading section, which is a Jumbotron. So to make a Jumbotron, which is also unchanged from Bootstrap 3, usually in the docs they use a div, and they give it a class of Jumbotron. I prefer to actually use a section, and this doesn't make any difference functionally, but it is a section of content, and I just like to label my sections. So I'm going to make a section, and I'm going to give it an ID that honestly we're not going to use at all. But I just like to give it this so that we know what we're working on. So this will be section ID of header up here, and then this we'll call gallery or something, so that we just have a nice reference to what we're working on. We don't need to do that. And then I'm going to give it a class of Jumbotron, and then inside of that, you'll notice all of the text is centered, so we can just knock that out here, text center. And then we have an H1. It doesn't have to be an H1, but it is the largest heading, so we'll make it an H1. And I gave it a class of display 3, I believe, which just makes it larger. And I just wrote pattern. So if we refresh, okay, so we have our text pattern. Next, I added a paragraph below with the class of lead. So that just gives us some extra space. It's supposed to make the text stand out a bit more. And then I just did some lorem ipsum. You can put whatever you want there. Refresh the page one more time. Cool. Next, we have 2 buttons. This is a primary button, and this is a success button. So you could make them an anchor tag or a button. I like to make these anchor tags because they're probably going to be links to go somewhere. They're not a form button. So I'm going to make them anchor tags, but you don't have to do that. And I'll do class equals, we have btn primary. Looks like I'm missing a quote. There we go. And the first one says do something, and we'll duplicate it. And the next one is btn success, and it says another thing. And let's refresh. There are the buttons. Okay, so this Jumbotron looks good aside from the background, and this is the only bit of CSS we need. We have an image here inside of the images folder that I gave you called header.jpg. And if we want to use it, the easiest way is to just assign it to the background of our Jumbotron. So actually we can use this header ID that we gave it, or we could just select the class Jumbotron. I'm going to use the ID of header though. And I'm not going to make a separate style sheet because it's the only line of CSS. Yeah, so it's honestly a good idea to make a separate style sheet, but it will be simpler for you to look at what I'm doing to keep it in one file. So I'm going to make a style tag here, the bane of many people's existence. And inside of that, I'm going to select my ID called header. And then inside of that, I'm going to set background to be an image with the URL of from where we are. We're in index.html. We need to go into the images folder. So images/header.jpg. In the moment of truth, refresh the page and we hope that it shows up. Okay, so it's there, and you can see that it's not quite the same the way that it's being displayed. It is the same image. I actually have to say I prefer this. I don't know why I didn't leave it as is, but I tweaked it so that the image was more centered and sort of scaled down. Here we're getting a nice larger version of the bricks. So what I did is I went in and said to center the image horizontally and vertically. And then also, so that's saying if you have a large image, which part of the image do you actually align to? Do you want to start with the left side or the right side, the top, the bottom, or the middle? But then I said cover and also no repeat. Now, I have to say I actually prefer the unaltered version. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this line so that we have in the comments, I'm going to comment the second one out so that you see how to achieve this effect where you see more bricks. But I'm going to get rid of it. I've changed my mind on that. I think it looks nicer having it zoomed in. Just a personal opinion though. All right, that's a long time spent on the header. Next up, we have the cards. And because of time considerations, I'm going to make that into a separate video right after this one, of course. See you then.